This is Political Forum for Wednesday, October 18th. Today, we welcome State Representative Christian Mitchell of the 26th District. Thank you for appearing on Political Forum, Representative Mitchell.
It's my honor. Glad to be here. Thank you all for having me.
Thank you. I'm Carolyn Day, a board member here at CAN TV, and you're watching live interactive program brought to you as a community service by CAN TV. Be sure to tell your friends that they can also watch the show online at cantv.org/hotline. We welcome your questions and comments for State Representative Mitchell by calling us at 312-738-1060. During the next 25 minutes, we'll try to get as many of your calls in as possible on the air. Here's the contact information for State Representative Christian Mitchell. If you weren't able to get that information, we'll show it to you again throughout the show. Many people don't know much about you.
Sure.
So we'd like you to take a moment to share whatever you think is pertinent to the people.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm State Representative Christian Mitchell of the 26th District. To answer your first question, yes, I am old enough to vote. I've been in office since I was 26 years old, January of 2013. Now, the 26th District is long and skinny. It goes from Goethe and Dearborn on the north end all the way down to 92nd Exchange on the south end, encompassing parts of the communities of Streeterville, downtown, River North, part of the South Loop and Prairie District, Bronzeville, Kenwood, Oakland, Greater Grand Crossing, some of Washington Park, South Shore, and South Chicago. And it's been my honor to serve for, I'm now in my third term, running again for a fourth term. I also chair a committee on economic opportunity because I'm passionate about economic opportunity for all people generally and for working people and poor people specifically. I have been an advocate for many years for education funding reform, which we finally got a version of done in Springfield. I'm sure we'll talk about that. And an advocate to make sure we're getting illegal guns off of our streets and reforming our criminal justice system. It's something that touched my family personally with an aunt who was wrongfully convicted of a crime and had difficulty recovering from it, and something I'm very, very passionate about. So those are some of the issues that I've worked on and a little bit about me, and grateful to be here with Carolyn, grateful to CAN TV for the public access work that you do, because I think it's incredibly important, and looking forward to the conversation.
Great, thank you. So we want to ask you a few questions here about the state budget. As they head into session, the budget for the first time in 3 years, we have one.
Yeah.
So what does this mean for lawmakers, and what does it mean for the residents of Illinois?
Yeah, so it's funny. I was at an event the other day, Carolyn, and someone was asking me, what accomplishments do you think are the biggest things you got done in Springfield? And I said, well, in setting the bar so low you can trip over it, we finally passed a budget after 3 years. It's important for a couple of reasons. One, it's going to stop our backlog of unpaid bills from growing. It was around $16 billion. That number is going to be cut in half if the governor does what he's supposed to do in terms of issuing bonds, so that's a really big deal. It means that monies for programs like Ceasefire are going to be cut back on. It means that our colleges and community colleges, something that I'm very passionate about, which are sort of economic centers, not just in the city of Chicago and places like Chicago State and Northeastern Illinois University, but also places like Southern Illinois University, Eastern Illinois, Western Illinois, which are the mills, the steel mills effectively of places like Carbondale, Macomb, Charleston, etc., are now going to be funded again. It means that our schools are going to, that have already opened, are going to stay open. It means that we've got funding for the human service programs that people rely on, whether it's in-home care for seniors who want to stay in their homes, fear going to a nursing home, and now have the ability to stay in their homes. That's going to be incredibly important for them, as well as for working moms, single mothers like my own, for example, who would rely on a bit of childcare to be able to go to work, stay at work. So it's incredibly important, but it is only the first step of many to turn the state around.
Great. I think this is really good. I hear your passion coming through. I want to ask you again another question about the state school funding plan and what you can tell us about how it will affect the schools in Chicago.
Absolutely. So if you asked me what was the one issue that I wanted to get done going down to be a state representative, I would have said education funding reform. We had a system that basically said your zip code, where you lived, where you were born, determine your access to a high quality public education, and I think that's wrong. I think that's bad for minority and poor children specifically, but for a bunch of children who are rural and downstate as well, who happen to be white, also suffered from similar affliction. The bill that we passed is going to put about $450 million new dollars in the city of Chicago. next year. That is money that can be spent to hire more teachers, to invest in libraries, to provide more of the necessary materials that students need to ensure that they are getting a quality education. I ultimately actually ended up voting against the final deal, and I did that because it also contained a provision that was going to provide a tax break for rich people to give money to programs or to scholarship programs to send kids to private schools. I think that using state resources for private schools is a breach of our public covenant. I think that it undermines our system of public education, and despite a lot of really good things in the bill, and I want to emphasize, I respect everyone who voted for that bill. It was not a bill that I could support in its final form, but it is a good bill, one that is going to drive more resources to kids who are in concentrated poverty, kids who are bilingual learners, kids who are have special needs. Those are the kind of kids who are most difficult to educate, and by the way, the type of kids who we educate in Chicago public schools all of the time. So it's an incredibly important deal for CPS, an incredibly important deal for all poor kids in schools around the state.
Well, guess what? We have a caller.
All right.
So, caller, are you there?
Hi, State Rep. Thanks for taking my call. I'm really enjoying listening to you and knowing all of the issues that you touch on. As a constituent and you being a representative, what do you think is the most effective way for a constituent to reach out to their representative to let them know about a legislation that they want passed, or just the way that they want things to go going forward? Is it via email, calls, in person? What do you think works best?
Absolutely. So thank you for your call. I would say probably the most impactful way is to make a phone call. I know it's kind of old school, and a lot of people do Twitter, they do Facebook, they do all the social media work, but when you take the time, and I know as a constituent how busy you are with work, potentially with kids, being a good steward of your neighborhood, when you pick up the phone and take the time to call me, one, it's an honor for me to take the call, and two, I realize the sacrifice you're making in doing so and making the effort. So making a phone call is probably the most practical and one of the best ways to reach out. My chief of staff tells me sort of at the end of the day on a hot issue how many calls we've gotten for and against. That helps me weigh and make my decisions in Springfield. Insofar as you've got time, it is also great when you can make the journey down to Springfield. Insofar as a phone call is an expression of how much you care and how much you are willing to sacrifice to be impactful in state government, making the physical visit, because it's 200 miles away, because it's a 3-hour drive, shows how passionate you are about an issue, and by the way, makes an impact not just on me, but on my fellow lawmakers in terms of my ability to produce results. So those are two ways that are important. Email is fine. We do read them. We do check them. But when you go that extra mile, it's something that's certainly impactful for me and also helps me make the case to my fellow elected officials. So thank you for asking the question.
Thank you so much. You're really dynamic. Wow. So with Governor Bruce Rauner's administration going to bond market to borrow $6 million to help pay down nearly $16 million in bills, the state owes scores of businesses, large, small. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I'm glad the governor is finally doing a bond issue. I would say a couple of things on this. So first of all, I and others, including the late State Rep Esther Golar, who was a dear friend and a leader in the Black Caucus, advocated for many years to refinance the state's debt to try to get a lower interest rate, because we spent something like $800 million of taxpayer funds last year just on interest payments alone. And actually, there was a Republican lawmaker, David Harris, who I think said it best, who said we might as well take $800 million, put it down in the well of the house and light it on fire, because that's money that we can't use for education, human services, infrastructure, et cetera. So I'm glad we're going to the bond markets. I'm glad that we passed a budget that includes a revenue increase. I know that's hard on our taxpayers, but it does mean that services will be restored. And it's going to help us pay that backlog of bills to small businesses who do business with the state, whether they are suppliers of paper or they are folks who care for elderly people in the community or provide youth violence services or counseling. These are folks who've been waiting in line for 2, 3, 5 years, who are going to start to see some of their money back. At the same time, what I also want to see is us in Springfield ask the wealthy, people like Bruce Rauner, to pay their fair share of income taxes, go to a progressive income tax structure, look at new ways to get revenue from those who have the money, who've done well in this economy, to make sure that we can go and not just knock down $6 billion of the $16 billion, but knock it all down so that we're back to a 30-day payment cycle, so that small businesses, especially, by the way, minority, women-owned, disabled, veteran businesses, can afford to take the risk of doing business with the state, because it makes them better, makes our communities better, keeps people out of prison, gives examples to young kids who want to see people who look like them working. There is so much that's tied up in this. So this is an important first step. Glad the governor is finally sort of getting off his duff and doing it. There is much more to be done.
Okay. Well, we have another caller.
Okay.
Caller, are you there?
Yes, so with the budget now back in play, question about mental health services, specifically mental health services for veterans, where the suicide rates are high due to PTSD and other issues. What can you forecast moving forward in terms of making sure that veterans can get the care that they need and get it right away?
Yeah, well, I appreciate the question, and you know, so this is personal for me. Every single year in Bronzeville, we have a parade honoring our military service people, specifically the African American service people, but service people from the South Side of Chicago writ large, and we do it at a monument on 35th Street. And every year we also have a brigade of homeless veterans, and every time I hear that term, homeless veterans, it makes my blood boil. My grandfather fought in the Korean conflict, was a great example for me. I still have his dog tags. And we need to do more to service that community. Now, my understanding is the Department of Veterans Affairs wants to do more on this issue specifically. I would look to support that through the appropriations process. But one of the things that concerns me is that this governor has continually, including I think in April of last year, maybe 2 years ago, specifically lined out programs that cut human services in general and mental health services and drug rehab services specifically. So I'm substantially concerned about that because that could have an outsized impact on veterans who have a deeper set of needs. So I'll continue to be vigilant on that issue. But folks like you calling into shows like this, as well as sending letters to elected officials and the governor's office, is going to make an impact on this issue. So I've logged it, having had this conversation with you, and will do all I can on it. But continue your advocacy. I really appreciate the phone call.
Great. There's a lot of talk recently about the criminal justice reform in Chicago and Cook County specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And fellow Illinois House members were looking to help ex-offenders get good employment through expungement. What are your thoughts about helping ex-offenders?
Yeah, so two-part answer on this, Carolyn. I think, so part one is I want to do all that I can on the front end to make sure that we are not putting people behind bars who don't need to be there in the first place. So one of the bills that I introduced that I'm most proud of this year would have actually ended cash bail in the state of Illinois. It's an incredibly unfair system that for the most part keeps people in jail awaiting trial. So remember, these are not folks who've been adjudicated to commit a crime. These are folks who are suspected, accused of committing a crime, who are sitting in jail not because they are a risk to society, because we haven't necessarily done a risk assessment on them, not because they are dangerous, but because they are poor. Tony Preckwinkle often says that jail is the intersection between racism and poverty. That tends to be true in the state of Illinois, but it is certainly an emphasis on poverty, whether you're black, white, or anything else. I introduced a bill to end that system. I'm going to continue introducing that bill every single year until it is a reality. Now, do we have to make sure the public is safe? We absolutely do. But we've got really good risk assessment tools and other data that can help us do that without putting people in jail who have not yet been adjudicated to have committed a crime, who may lose their job, who may lose custody of their kids, who have a series of collateral consequences that, by the way, make them harder to reintegrate back into society in the first place. So we actually this year passed a bill that ends the presumption of cash bail for nonviolent offenders. We need to go, I think, a bit further and try to make sure that insofar as a risk assessment says people are not dangerous and will not harm anyone, they shouldn't be in the first place. On the back end, part two to that question, I have consistently supported, along with people like LaShawn Ford, Carol Ammons, Letisa Wallace, a series of bills mostly put forward by the Black Caucus, but supported, by the way, by some good moderate Republicans like former Representative Dennis Reboletti, to do expungement, to do sealing affirmatively. Art Turner has also carried a bunch of these bills that I've been a chief co-sponsor on. So I've been a leader on these efforts. I intend to continue being one. Appreciate the question, and let's continue the fight.
Thank you for that. We have another caller. Caller, are you there?
Hi, yes, thank you very much for taking my call. My question for Representative Mitchell is this. It seems that over the past maybe 3 or so years, the gridlock in Springfield has become more pronounced, and I was hoping that maybe you could speak to some of the challenges that come with trying to reach across the aisle and getting things accomplished that both sides can agree with.
Thanks for the question. This is a question I spent a lot of time thinking about. And look, there blame on both sides of the aisle. There's no question about that. None at all. Democrats have had a majority in the House, in the Senate, and had the governor's mansion for a while. We should have passed progressive income tax by now to lower the burden on working families and middle-income people and make sure that those who can are paying their fair share. We should have passed education funding reform years ago and a lot sooner. We should have been reforming our criminal justice system before and a lot sooner. There's no question about that. Now, that said, the Republican Party is in a real bad place. I'm a proud liberal Democrat, and so I believe that having good, smart Republicans, again, I think David Harris, who's now retiring, is a good example of that, who can help check my worst instincts, who help us be fiscally responsible is a good thing. At the same time, this is the Republican Party that has supported for many years an extremist in Paul Ryan, who has tried to block grant Medicaid and has this vision of a shrinking government that does less to help people, that cuts taxes willy-nilly and in a way that hurts the middle class. It's going to hurt our economy. And by the way, like to Donald Trump, who I think is pretty universally known to be a racist and a xenophobe and completely unfit for his office. And this is the same Republican Party that in some ways exists in the state of Illinois. Bruce Rauner, while not as openly extreme as Donald Trump, is about as extreme as he is functionally. This is a person who cut higher education by 62.5%, a person who cut the child care program, cut in-home care for seniors, which, by the way, forces more seniors in a nursing home, which costs the state more money. That is a real problem, and this governor, because of how rich he is, because of how much money he gives to the Republican Party, has effectively made it so that the party is a reflection of his ideals which say unions are the problem, working people make too much money, government workers are too rich and are just taken from the system, people who have earned their pension are the problem, they're the reason why the state is so broke. And when that person is in complete control of the Republican Party, it makes it incredibly difficult for people who would otherwise be reasonable to cross the aisle. So is there some blame on the Democratic side? Absolutely. But mostly, we have seen a Republican Party that both locally and nationally has given into its worst instincts. And I think that is incredibly impactful and corrosive on our public discourse.
Thank you. You're watching Political Forum, a community service CAN TV. I'm Carolyn Day, a CAN TV board member. This is a live interactive show, and you can call CAN TV at 312-738-1060 if you have a question for State Representative Christian Mitchell. We have another good question for you.
Okay.
So the Obama Library has many Chicagoans excited. So is there anything you'd like to update or give us about the library and what we'll be looking for?
Absolutely. Well, I, like others, am very excited about the library. I had the fortunate opportunity between my first primary election, my first general election, to actually work on the Obama campaign in 2012 as the director of paid media, doing television, or for the Midwest, doing television, radio, mail for Iowa and Wisconsin, helping getting the president elected, and was one of the honors of my life. He's actually a constituent who I got to early vote with in 2012. So I have incredible admiration for him, what he has meant. And by the way, not just to the African American community, but to a generation of young white men and women who've grown up seeing an African American president in a position of power and authority and respecting him, and what that means for society and the path that it's paved for me. For the foundation and the library itself, I'm very excited about the opportunities. They have been very clear about wanting to make sure that people in our neighborhoods are getting employed, not just in construction, but in permanent jobs and professional services. And we've got to hold their feet to the fire on that, especially if there's going to be any sort of state capital money involved, and I intend to. Love my president. At the same time, we still all believe in trust but verify. I think it's an incredible economic opportunity to attract investment to the south side of Chicago, to do infrastructure and development, to do educational opportunities, to use that space, as I believe is their vision, to get more people involved and excited about public service. So I think it's an incredibly important opportunity that I'm very, very excited about, and I think it's going to be transformational for not just my district, not just the south side of Chicago, but the city of Chicago in general.
Yeah, well, that's another nice little segue to, you were talking a little bit about the criminal justice reform system, and so there's been a lot of talk about the Cook County specifically, and House members looking at ex-offenders to get their information in the history through an expungement. What are your thoughts about helping ex-offenders?
Yeah, and we talked about this a little bit earlier.
Uh-huh.
I think mostly it's a couple things. So yes, again, expungement, sealing, all incredibly important in terms of giving people a second chance. But I also think again, it's really important to do sort of some front end things. So I talked about ending cash bail; it's an incredibly important one. I also believe that we decriminalize small amounts of marijuana. I think we should actually move toward legalization. But in the meantime, a guy getting busted, with a dime bag of marijuana, and then having a bunch of collateral consequences where, he's no longer able to get a job, no longer able to apply for student loans. Those things are
Or a
incredibly.
job at the Obama Library?
Or a job potentially at any sort of public, foundation or office. I think that's incredibly damaging, and I think that we should be treating the problem of drug addiction as a public health problem instead of a public safety
i.e.
problem.
the funding for mental health?
Funding for mental health, making sure, by the way, that we are seeing people employed. So one of the things that's rough about the drug epidemic is that African Americans, people of color, are much more likely to be pulled over, stopped, arrested, given harsh sentences. But you also are starting to see in places like West Virginia, places like Appalachia generally, places, by the way, in downstate Illinois, which might surprise a lot of folks, where you are seeing poor folks who are not people of color, who do not have the employment opportunities that they should, turning not just toward drugs, but also toward prescription medication and controlled substances. So making sure that we are repairing our economy, investing in higher education instead of cutting it like Bruce Rauner did. Those sorts of things really matter in terms of keeping people off of drugs, out of prison, and on a course for being productive members of society, so that we're never getting to a place of having to expunge and seal because they've never gotten to that place in the first place.
Yeah. There's also a recent report stating that the Hispanic population is growing in Chicago. It's the second largest ethnic group. How can we capitalize on the terms of bringing and making sure there's diversity within the workplace?
Well,
And diversity meaning just not African American or Hispanic as much as age, persons with disabilities, and all of those included.
Yeah, well, so one, make sure that we, continue to do enforcement on making sure that people are not discriminated against in the workplace on the basis of race, age, location, whatever it is. So beefing up those agencies. I think that the transformation of the city of Chicago and the growth of the Hispanic population is an incredible opportunity for the Black-Brown Coalition. I think that we have to be intensive about it. I think we need to make sure that we are having frank and candid conversations about the needs of all segments of that community, from opportunities for scholarship programs, for expungement, making sure we're taking care of dreamers, but also making sure that our fates are tied together, that we don't see each other as competitors, but as fellow citizens of the city of Chicago, the state of Illinois, and this nation. I think that what we also need to do, and what this also emphasizes, is yes, the Hispanic population has grown, but the African American population has also shrank. And when you've got judges getting shot outside of their homes, that's a thing that's going to make a homeowner sort of reconsider
Absolutely.
whether or not they want to be here, whether or not they want to stay. When the quality of our schools, because of the lack of investment, hasn't increased in the way that it should, that's going to make homeowners question whether or not they're able to stay here. One of the things I'm also trying to get past in Springfield is the idea of sort of a home ownership equity program that would say that homeowners could come together as a community area, put a small levy on themselves by referendum if they so choose, in order to provide no-interest loans to do improvements on their homes. It's going to increase the value of their home, increase their wealth, give them an opportunity to try to control those costs so that they can stay in the community as we try to improve the schools, get the guns off the streets, do the things we need to do to make our community stronger. So we've got to do a couple things at once here.
Excellent. I like that. Well, Representative Mitchell, we just have a few minutes left in tonight's show. Are there any final comments you'd like to make?
Look, I think we covered most of it. First of all, again, thank you to you. I know this is your maiden voyage,
Yes,
and
it
it's
is.
been my honor to be here with you. Thank you again to CAN TV, because, again, I think the public sphere is something we don't talk enough about. It's something that's shrinking, and I think providing politicians, nonprofits, et cetera, with a forum to come directly to people is incredibly important. So thank you to all of you here at CAN TV for what you do. I would just say I'm going to continue fighting for you. I'm going to continue speaking on the issues and doing my job, which is not just to talk about how important they are, but to have real solutions. If you have any questions for me, you've seen the number up on the screen, please give us a call. We would love to talk to you, and thank you all for taking the time to call in tonight and to watch.
And again, if you need to reach Representative Mitchell, here's the contact information. He's at 449 East 35th Street, Chicago, Illinois. The number is 773-924-1755. Email Mitchell, District 26 at att.net. Representative Mitchell, thank you again for appearing here on Political Forum, and we thank the viewers who called in tonight. Our telephone technician has been Sylvia, and Political Forum is brought to you as a community service by CAN TV. Please join us every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. on Channel 21 and or cantv.org/hotline, and good night.